That feeling when you realise you're not the only fruitcake in the village. The halfway mark, baby. The halfway mark. Who am I winking at? Could be a lady, and if you're not a lady, I take the wink back. It's the homosexual way. It's not an episode of Yellowjackets unless Shauna has a car accident. How much does she pay on insurance? It must be a lot. Misty calling Ben her first boyfriend. I'd be lying if I said I didn't understand those levels of delusion. I mean, lesbians are so thoughtful. Melissa enacting violence just to impress the girl that she likes and then risking death by UTI in that tent. Oh, I'd be lying if I said I didn't understand those levels of simpery. Ty bringing her girlfriend to meet her wife and son is season 1 L-word levels of messiness. Simone's side-eye may have been the most brutal thing about this show so far. You guys, this was the calm before the storm. We all know the descent into madness and chaos is coming. Episode 5, it was a lesson in edging, and we need some release. I'm not gonna wink again. Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video, we're just going to be discussing thoughts and theories on episode 5 of Yellowjackets season 3. This video will contain spoilers. You have been warned. Let's begin with the whole Lottie murder mystery situation. To start with, I thought it was very interesting that Misty put 3 photos of Lottie down in front of 3 people. Now, this doesn't have to mean anything, but it could potentially be a clue that 3 people were involved in her death. This connection of 3 people and a body also connects to Travis's drawing, which depicts 3 people underneath a body. It's theorized that it's Ben's body in this drawing, however, it's open for interpretation, and it will be interesting to see if there's a connection or parallel between these 2 things by the end of the season. It's also revealed that Lottie has been living with her father in his penthouse suite for weeks, which means she wasn't being honest with Shauna when she turned up on her doorstep and claimed that she had nowhere else to go. Now, presumably, Lottie turned up on Shauna's doorstep in order to gain access to Callie, considering her fixation on her. But Walter suggests to Shauna that maybe Lottie did this because she needed a friend. And we do see pictures of Lottie and the Yellowjackets inside of her room, which makes this notion a plausible one, but personally, I don't buy the friendship angle. These women are always up to something. But let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments section. Anyway, Misty turns up at Mr. Matthews' place and convinces him to let her inside under the guise of being a neighbor looking for a package. She's on the case. Now, what's interesting here is that Lottie's death has been ruled accidental by the authorities, and the mention of it being accidental could potentially be a clue that connects back to the Shauna and Hamlet connection, since in Hamlet murders someone by accident due to mistaken identity, meaning this could be the case with Shauna and Lottie. And furthermore, when Misty goes to visit Mr. Matthews, he tells her that this was an accident, plain and simple. Artie down at the station knows his foundation won't see a dime if he says otherwise. And it's easy to dismiss this line as nonsense, considering that Mr. Matthews isn't all there, but there could be a grain of truth to what he's saying, which would explain why the authorities are not treating Lottie's death as suspicious, despite the fact that she withdrew a large sum of money beforehand. Is suspicious. Now, Lottie practicing an apology and taking a large sum of money out of her account suggests to me that she was either involved in a blackmail scenario where someone has information about her or something she did that she doesn't want getting out, or she was trying to offer that money to someone as part of an apology. And the one theory I keep coming back to with this is Walter and Melissa. Just hear me out. It's hinted that Melissa is Shauna's stalker in the first couple of episodes of season 3, where we see teen Melissa literally stalking teen Shauna. Melissa's hiding in the bushes watching her. Shauna's like, stalk much? Yeah, the hints are hinting. And through Shauna's subconscious / dead Jackie, we learn that Shauna did something to someone when she got back from the wilderness. And she thinks her being targeted is related to this thing. And it's entirely possible that this thing could somehow involve Lottie. So if there's any truth to this theory, Walter, Melissa, and Shauna could be the 3 people involved in Lottie's death. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Going back to Misty at Mr. Matthews' place, she discovers that Walter and Shauna are there as well, pretending to fix Mr. Matthews' internet. And during their interaction, Walter offers Misty a chance to join forces with them, to which Misty responds that she'd rather jump out of a window. And I wonder if this is another clue as to what's going to happen in their story later on. I wonder if Misty's going to be jumping out of a window to try and escape him or something similar. I mean, usually they pepper little clues like that into the dialogue, so it's a possibility. Interestingly, Walter also proposes to Shauna that they swap hair follicles as assurance or proof that neither of them killed Lottie. And Shauna refuses to do this, but that's not out of character for Shauna, so I don't necessarily think this is a sign of her guilt. She doesn't trust Walter. Personally, I think Walter may use Shauna's DNA to try and frame her for Lottie's murder. And one thing that stood out to me is Walter tells Shauna that mutually assured destruction can be devastatingly effective. And mutually assured destruction is a military strategy used in wars or combat where if one side makes an attack, the destruction of both sides is ensured. And this is definitely a clue as to where their storylines are headed, 100%. I think they are both hiding something. I think they are both guilty of something. I think they are suspicious of each other. And I think if one of them tries to expose the other, everything is going to go up in flames. Misty's going to jump out of a window whilst there is an explosion in the background. I am calling it now. Also, the license plate on Walter's car pretty much spells out not Walter. So from this, we can gather that Walter Tattersall is not his real name, and he is likely using a fake name because his real name could reveal a connection that he's trying to hide. Interestingly, he also has a boat figure hanging from his car mirror, which not only connects back to Misty finding him on a boat in season 2 where he tells her that he has a boat because he hates bureaucratic red tape and you never know when you'll need to leave the country without a passport, aka get away without revealing his true identity. But if you Google Walter Tattersall, you will find there's a real life Walter Tattersall who was a famous marine biologist. So it could also possibly be a nod to that. Tinfoil hat time. I think Shauna ends up killing Walter, and I think she ends up on the run from the police with Misty because of this. And the reason I think this is because of everything we have discussed in this video so far, in combination with the Thelma and Louise comment that Misty made in Shauna's car in episode 2 of this season. But let me know your own theories down in the comment section because I want to know. Moving on to Shauna visiting Lottie's room. I think this scene is interesting because we finally see Shauna showing some emotion over Lottie's death and thinking over their history together, and it reminds us of Shauna's more human side, that she's not completely cutthroat and devoid of feeling. And the way Shauna goes along with Mr. Matthews' delusions and hugs him shows us that she's still capable of empathy and acts of kindness, which is important in relation to the nuance and layering in her character. And I think this nuance in the characters is important because it's one of the plus points of this show. None of these characters are black or white, including Shauna. It was also interesting to get a small glimpse into Lottie's life and backstory through this scene, because again, the characters themselves are one of the most interesting things about this show. And we had only just begun to explore adult Lottie as a character and her dynamics with the others before she was killed off. So I appreciate that they're exploring her character post-death, and like I said in my review of episode 4, it's possible there may be more of that to come this season. Moving on to Ben. Yes, Coach Scott. So in this episode, we can see Ben tied up and locked in with the animals. And interestingly, in the first shot of Ben in this episode, we can hear the sound of ducks quacking in the background, which once again reinforces a connection between him and the ducks. And as discussed many times, the ducks have a connection to the foie gras that Ty and Van were eating in the restaurant. And what's interesting about this is Ben also mentions special feeding in relation to the baby goat that Keela is holding, which is the same baby goat we see laying on him later on in the episode. And again, this mention of special feeding circles back to the foie gras and the ducks, and also to the concept of torture and cruelty in consumption. Now, in this episode, they already have Ben tied up and Melissa slicing the Achilles tendon on his remaining foot. So we're already seeing him be subjected to a level of torture already. But the question is, just how far is this torture going to go? And is it going to involve force feeding? Another point of interest in relation to this is we see that Ben didn't touch his dinner before being taken for execution. And if he goes on a hunger strike, that could lead to the girls force feeding him to keep him alive, especially now that they believe that he is their bridge home. When Ben is about to be executed, they put Jackie's necklace on him, which reinforces the connection between this necklace and death. And interestingly, in this scene, Ben says, "If you're going to do this, look me in the eye," which connects to a similar line that Nat said to Shauna in season 2, episode 8, when she told Shauna, "You'll have to look me in the eyes," in response to Shauna trying to slit her throat from behind. So Ben saying this line could be a clue that Nat will be the one to kill him. And I think that it may be a mercy killing because he's in so much misery and pain from the torture he's about to undergo. And this concept of a mercy killing would also tie into Shauna telling Nat, "You don't have to be such a saint," in response to Nat telling Shauna she doesn't have to enjoy hurting Ben so much. So it's all very connected. You can very much sense the rising tension between Nat and Shauna in this episode, who have very different approaches to leading a group, and this is making me wonder if the group is going to split between these two at some point. Moving on to Shauna and Melissa. I thought they were quite interesting this episode. For one, Melissa makes a very thoughtful knife sheath for Shauna, and at first, you can see Shauna is annoyed by Melissa's presence. She just wants to be left alone, but after seeing this gift, she's prompted into asking Melissa why she even likes her. And this is very telling of Shauna's low self-esteem and poor self-perception. And Melissa brings up both Jackie and Jeff treating Shauna badly in response to this, which is interesting because the conversation is about romantic interest. So the mention of Jackie here can be taken as another piece of subtext or a clue to the true nature of Shauna's feelings for Jackie. But of course, there's more than one way to interpret this conversation, and Melissa could have just been talking generally about how people Shauna loved, platonically or romantically treated her, which has resulted in her having this low self-esteem. Melissa also points out to Shauna that she let Jackie and Jeff treat her in that way, but now she's changed and she likes that Shauna is not afraid of the bad parts of herself anymore. And this is an interesting piece of dialogue because in a warped, twisted way, Melissa is building Shauna's self-confidence and self-esteem back up, but she's linking that to Shauna's bad parts. So we're seeing Shauna kind of regaining her self-esteem and building herself back up, but in an unhealthy way, and equating selfishness and letting her dark side run wild with her elevating herself and feeling better about herself, so to speak. Another point of interest with Shauna and Melissa this episode is the card scene. Shauna gets the 9 of spades, and in cartomancy, the 9 of spades is traditionally a card of sadness, adversity, failure, suffering, emotional or physical pain, grief and malice. It's a very unfavourable card and forebodes tragic events, including accidents, Lottie, self-injury and harm to oneself or another. It can also indicate a loss of control, a breakdown of established patterns, Nat being the leader, and it can represent a disappointment or a broken heart, Melissa, karmic debts, Jeff, obligations and duty to self and others. All of this so closely aligns with what we've seen of Shauna's storyline so far and with what we suspect will be a part of her storyline in the future. Melissa picks the 2 of clubs, which in cartomancy often symbolises the duality of choices and decisions, and can describe a meeting of minds, a codependent relationship, and can also be about creating boundaries and maintaining integrity within a relationship. which very much feels as though it's going to be relevant to Melissa and Shauna's storyline this season. Then we see Melissa doing Shauna's bidding towards the end of the episode, and we can see Shauna manipulating Melissa by echoing the conversation that they had earlier about not being scared of the bad parts of yourself in order to encourage her to commit an act of violence. And the fact that Melissa is reluctant at first but then embraces it portrays how Shauna has introduced Melissa to this bloodlust, so to speak. And in that sense, the knife and sheath is very symbolic of how their relationship is tied to violence. And also with the knife being a perfect fit in the sheath, how well these two fit together because of their shared bloodlust and enjoyment of asserting power over other people. The hand holding with one hand drenched in blood also reinforces that association of violence in their connection and shows that they are bonded by the spilling of others' blood. It's very intense. And this blood on Melissa's hand also connects back to Melissa being this Lady Macbeth figure that we were speaking about in episode 4 and the Shakespearean themes in Shauna's storyline this season. Shauna also very much publicly claims Melissa in this episode, which has some of the group shooketh. Like I've said before, I wonder how their relationship is going to be received by the rest of the group, because I don't think the group's reaction is to do with the fact that they're a couple. I think it's more to do with the fact that the group recognize that this alliance or relationship have a serious impact on the group. I think they recognize it as toxic and dangerous. And lastly, the song Rid of Me by PJ Harvey plays in the background of Melissa and Shauna's last scene in this episode. And looking at the lyrics to this song, I think this song is yet another clue that Shauna is not rid of Melissa in the adult timeline, and that this teen relationship is going to end with Melissa wishing that she had never met Shauna and vice versa at all. Moving on to Lottie, Aquila and Travis. Lottie takes Aquila and Travis on a trip to the caves so Aquila can receive more messages from it. And speaking my truth, I don't care for teen Lottie at all. I know she has mental health issues, and I know all of the characters are supposed to be awful and are just trying to survive in the way that they know how, but Lottie just seems so manipulative and predatory in the name of her beliefs, and I honestly just wish she'd leave both Travis and Aquila alone. Anyway, before entering the caves, Aquila says to Lottie, "Isn't this kinda dumb? We're just getting high off of gas and seeing things. Doesn't mean it's true," which is Aquila acknowledging the reality of the situation. And in response to this, Lottie tells Aquila that the gas is a conduit and compares it to the Oracle of Delphi. And the Oracle of Delphi, also known as the Pythia, is a famous ancient oracle believed to have delivered prophecies from the Greek god Apollo. And the Pythia reached the height of her fame between the 8th and 4th centuries BCE, when Apollo's advice or sanction was sought by lawmakers, colonists, and founders of cults, which of course relates to Lottie. Another interesting connection is that one of the main stories about the Pythia, taken from historical records, claim that she delivered oracles in a frenzied state induced by vapors rising from a chasm in the rock, and that she spoke gibberish, which priests interpreted as prophecies, which is not only relevant to what's happening in this scene with Aquila and Lottie, but also ties into the theme of the characters reading into things and applying the supernatural or divine to the everyday or the ordinary that's threaded into the show. In Aquila's dream, we see her standing on a cliff and then standing on Coach Scott, who is tied up and stretched out like a bridge. And beyond the Ben Bridge, Aquila sees darkness and then city lights. There are so many interpretations of this scene, and I'd love to know yours because I really don't have a clue as to what this could be about. On the one hand, yes, the city lights represent civilization, so Aquila's interpretation of Ben being the way home makes sense. But Ben being the bridge could also symbolize that if they murder him, they will lose any connection to civilization and be stranded as creatures of the wilderness. It may also represent to the audience how the girls are going to think Ben is dead, but actually he somehow survives and gets rescued. And there's also the connection to Ben's boyfriend, friend, telling him that he wants him to move to the city with him. There's so many interpretations. It's the lady doing math meme. Moving on to Ty and Van, let's start with adult Ty and Van. So Van seems to be the most moved or shaken up about Lottie's death in this episode, whilst Ty, much less so. In fact, out of all of them, Ty seems the most unbothered about Lottie's death. I've seen some people theorize that she seems so unmoved because other Ty has taken over, but it could also be a portrayal of the way Ty herself has changed as a person, especially since she's become much more reckless, unhinged and uncaring in general this season. And so Van proceeds to question Ty about where she was in the period before she met back up with her after they had followed the Queen of Hearts man up to his apartment. And Ty thinks it's ridiculous that Van would even insinuate she had something to do with Lottie, but the conversation gets cut short by a phone call from Simone. Now, personally, I don't think either of these two are involved in Lottie's death. I could be wrong, I know, but it seems to me like they have a lot of other things going on in their storyline, and whilst they do have motives, personally, I feel their motives are a lot weaker in comparison to other characters. But let me know your thoughts, because I am open to reading theories that involve them in Lottie's death. Then Ty and Van meet up with Simone and Sammy, which is messy as all hell. Why would you bring your girlfriend to see your wife and son? I just want to know what Ty was thinking. Of all the crazy shit Ty has done, this has to be up there. Anyway, whilst Van and Simone are talking, Sammy runs up to Simone scared, and they walk off together. We later learn that Sammy asks Ty, "Are you not my mummy anymore?" And when she reassures him, he looks at her with suspicion and goes to Simone. Now, a lot of people have been interpreting this scene as proof that Ty has become other Ty, and that Sammy can sense this. And that could be the case. It's a very valid theory. Personally, though, I think this is a sign that Ty has become someone else. Not necessarily other Ty, but as in she herself has regressed and changed as a person. And after this rejection from Sammy, Ty asks Van how she would feel about a change of scenery. ... A nature vacation, perhaps? I am so scared. Moving on to Teen Ty and Van. Now, Ty picks the King of Hearts card, which means she will be the one to kill Ben. And Van refers to this card as the Suicide King. And this card is known as the Suicide King because of the position of the sword that the king holds, where it looks as though he's inserting it into his head. And of course, this has connections to Ben's suicide attempt. But I really hope that Ty picking this card is not a clue that she is going to be the one to commit suicide at some point, especially since Teen Ty also makes a joke about blowing her brains out. I'm suspicious, but I really hope that this is not on the cards, no pun intended. Interestingly, Van also gives Ty a look when she first picks the King of Hearts card, and then later tells her, "I wish I could have told you to pick a different card," meaning that Van can recognize which cards are which face down, which is significant, especially when it comes to the group's rituals, because it suggests that Van knows which cards to avoid. Ty is very stressed about being given the task of killing Ben, and Van suggests to her that she summon other Ty to get the job done, which is interesting because I wonder if Van has been able to manipulate other Ty before, or will be able to do that in the future, because she understands that other Ty is capable of doing horrific things that normal Ty isn't. And this concept could be incredibly relevant to the adult Ty and Van timeline. Overall, I thought this episode was a slow burn, baby. It's not my favourite of this season so far, but I have to say I really enjoyed the last 5 minutes of it. Those last 5 minutes were incredibly intense, and I like that. And like I said earlier, this episode very much feels like the calm before the storm, and I expect that the storm is about to start rising next episode, so strap in. Okay guys, let me know your thoughts and theories on episode 5 down in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.